Okay, let's go over the Apigee Service Broker for Pivotal Cloud Foundry and Cloud Foundry. So before we begin, you might be wondering, what is Pivotal Cloud Foundry and what is Cloud Foundry? Well, Cloud Foundry is an open source platform as a service, which makes it very simple for application developers to push their apps to the cloud. And they do this by command line arguments such as cfpush, cfbind, and cfstart. And what Pivotal Cloud Foundry is a commercial wrapper around Cloud Foundry. And what this means is it adds extra tooling around Cloud Foundry with things like the Ops Manager, which allows you to control your Cloud Foundry deployment, tiles, which allow you to add services to your Cloud Foundry deployment, and the Application Manager, which helps you deploy and manage your applications into Cloud Foundry. So there's a couple basic components of a Cloud Foundry app that we are going to go over. There are build packs, droplets, the Meta-buildpack, the Decorator build packs, and service brokers. So what is a build pack? Well, simply put, build packs are responsible for preparing the machine image for an application. And what this means is that it adds any dependencies that your application might need to run into the container before the app actually starts. So what is a droplet? Well, a droplet is a Cloud Foundry unit of execution, and this is the archive that actually contains the app and metadata and will actually run as a container that can be scaled inside your Cloud Foundry environment. So when you think of an application instance, this is basically what a droplet is. So what's the Meta-buildpack? Well, the Meta-buildpack is basically a build pack that decomposes other build packs. So what does this really mean? It means that it decomposes things into real build packs. So these are the things like Node.js, Java, the basic dependencies that your app might need, and Decorator build packs. And these are the type of build packs that actually inject stuff into the droplet. So going into more detail about a Decorator build pack, basically what Decorator build pack does is it implements add-on features. So whether this be configuration management like Spring config, service registration and discovery, or in our case, a sidecar app that acts as a gateway. So basically, it's anything that can be injected into containers can be made into a Decorator build pack. And finally, what is a service broker? Well, in Cloud Foundry, there are concepts such as services and apps combine to services. So a service broker is a mechanism that allows an app to bind to a service. And these can either be local or remote services like MySQL or in our case, the Apigee Service Broker. And they expose these services by an API. This brings us to the Apigee Service Broker. And the Apigee Service Broker has three different types of plans. We have the org plan and the micro gateway plan, which are considered as route services. And then we have the co-resident plan, which is considered to be a Decorator build pack. So how the org plan works is that traffic comes into the Go router, which is the router that sits in front of Cloud Foundry and all your applications that might be in there. And it sends it to Apigee Edge, whether that be on-prem or in the cloud. And it goes through the normal flow that would happen to requests that came into Apigee Edge, whether that be spike arrest or quota. After that, it gets returned back to the Go router, which then redirects it back into the application that you have running inside Cloud Foundry, and then back out and into Apigee Edge, and then back out to the end user. And how Micro Gateway works is that you launch Micro Gateway as a separate application within Cloud Foundry. So similar to the Apigee Edge, traffic comes into the Go router, it gets redirected into the Micro Gateway application. It processes the request, and then it sends it back to the Go router, and then that sends it back to your application. So it's a little bit less network hops because you just stay within Cloud Foundry itself, but still some network hops between the Go router, Micro Gateway, Go router, and your application, and back out to the customer. So how the Decorator build pack works is that we actually launch this within the application itself. So how we mentioned earlier with how Decorator build packs basically just add on extra functionality to your application container, we basically took this idea and added Micro Gateway within the container itself. So instead of requests going into the Go router, going to a separate instance or Apigee Edge in the cloud, we actually just send it directly to the application container. The request gets processed in Micro Gateway, gets sent to the local application and then back out to the end user. So each of these different plans have different benefits with them. The org plan allows you to have access to all of Edge, and Edge can actually be installed inside the same Pivotal Cloud Foundry or Cloud Foundry environment. So that would make the actual latency a little bit less when dealing with an org plan versus actually going out to the cloud and coming back into Cloud Foundry. Micro Gateway allows you to have one micro gateway to many different applications, and it doesn't actually hog the application resources because it's a separate application, and it has smaller routing latency compared to the org environment. Co-resident, on the other hand, has zero routing overhead. It has per container control, and has simple architecture. And it's much easier to understand than how a request would go in and out of something like Micro Gateway or the org plan. So now that we understand what makes Cloud Foundry, as well as how the Apigee Service Broker works, we're going to go over a quick demo to tie everything together. And we're going to go over deploying, and we're going to do this via the Apigee Service Broker as a tile in Ops Manager. And then we're actually going to bind services and actually test it out. And we're going to do this via a command line tool that we made called Apigee Push, Apigee Bind, and Apigee Unbind. And each of these commands have their respective counterparts with each plan, whether that be the org plan, Micro Gateway plan, and Micro Gateway co-resident plan. And we'd be happy to respond to any questions or feedback you might have about what we've gone over today at community.apigee.com. So we're going to go over how would you install the Apigee Service Broker via a PCF tile. So once you've downloaded the tile and uploaded it to your Ops Manager, you'll see a page similar to this. And just remember, Ops Manager is a Pivotal-only tool that allows you to configure certain services that can then go into your Cloud Foundry environment. So once you have your tile uploaded to Ops Manager, all you have to do is click on the tile, in our case the Apigee tile, and you get to this little configuration dashboard. And inside here you can configure multiple things, whether it be what zone your jobs are placed in or where your service broker is going to be located. But the main thing what we want to do is look at this little tab. And what this tab has is multiple configurations for your Apigee organizations and environments. For instance, if you have an AmeriDemo organization that we'll be using to actually test everything out, is that you'll put your Apigee organization here, you'll put your environment, you'll have your dashboard URL, your management URL, and everything associated with this org and environment. And if you had another cloud environment you want to use, you could have another one called My App, and you could use that one. So you'd configure My App and test and have a configuration set up for that. And it's very easy to add another configuration here. All you have to do is click Add, and scroll down to the bottom. All you do is, let's say you had an on-prem one, and you have on-prem. And what you could do is have like my on-prem organization with a test environment. And you can go ahead and change these defaults to be whatever you have. So on-prem, you can change that to be on-prem and whatever you need to do for these down here. And all you have to do is click Save. And that will update your tile. And then once that tile configuration is all set up, all you have to do is go over here and click Apply Changes. And once all your changes are done applying, you'll be ready to run in Cloud Foundry. So now that we have the Service Broker installed, we can actually see this reflected in the Cloud Foundry environment. And the way we can interact with the Cloud Foundry environment is through the CF CLI. So if we do CF-H, we can see that there's a whole bunch of different commands you can use to interact with your applications. So for instance, you can interact with your apps, you can interact with your services. Anything you need to do with Cloud Foundry, you can most likely do with the CF CLI. So what we can actually do now is run CF Marketplace. And we can see that we have our Apigee Edge service installed via our tile with the 3 different plans installed. We have the org plan, Micro Gateway, and Micro Gateway co-resident plan available. And in order for our apps to actually interact with these different plans, we need to make service instances of each one of them. So what we can actually do is do CF create service, and we can do Apigee Edge and then we can actually do the org plan, and we can name this org. And then we actually have some other extra configuration details we need to pass in. So we need to tell it which org we want to use and which environment we want to use. These are your Apigee org and Apigee environments. And so we actually go through, and we had to do this for every single plan so that we can interact with them later. So if we do micro gateway, we can name this one micro. And then if we do the co-resident plan, we can name this one, let's say, co-resident. And so after we do CF services, we can see that we have now 3 different services reflecting 3 different plans. So we have an org service that reflects the org plan, a microservice, which reflects the micro gateway plan, and the co-resident service, which reflects the micro gateway co-resident plan. So now we have these services installed, we can actually go ahead and interact with them through applications and bindings. Let's go ahead and push an app to Cloud Foundry and bind it to the org plan. So if we look inside this directory, we'll see a simple Node.js server along with an application manifest. And the application manifest is what Cloud Foundry uses to define an application. So if we actually go in and look at what's inside this manifest, we can see a simple YAML file with a name. So the name of the app we want to push, in this case would be sample, the memory we want to give it, the number of instances we want to run, the host name, so sample dot whatever your domain is, the path, so we're going to push everything inside this directory, and the build pack we want to use, which is Node.js because we're pushing a Node.js application. So let's actually go ahead and do cf apigee push. It's going to ask if we're using the micro gateway co-resident plan. We're not, so we're going to go ahead and click no. Name we want to push it with, let's say sample. It's going to actually go ahead and push the app to Cloud Foundry and actually start it up. So right now, it's actually downloading the build pack and installing all the dependencies it might need. So for instance, it's installing Node.js as well as all the dependencies our app has along with it. And once this completes, it will actually start up the application. And we can see that right now. And so we can see the app is running. And if we actually do cf apps, we can see some information about it. So, it started, it has 1 out of 1 instances running, 600 megs of memory, 1 gig of disk, and the URL that it has. So we actually can go ahead and curl this, and we get back a hello from CF app response. So now what we can do is actually bind this to the service instance we made earlier. So if we do CF services, remember we have this org service. So what we're actually going to do is actually do a cf apigee bind org. In this case, we're actually not going to use a bearer token to authenticate. We're actually going to use basic authorization. So we're going to go ahead and press no. So we're going to do your username, password. In this case, we're actually going to do a proxy bind because we actually want to create the proxy and bind the application. So we're going to do proxy bind. We're going to do test as our environment. Remember, it was a Mare demo 5. The sample is the name of the app we want to bind to. Domain is actually going to be apps.pcf.apigeek.net. This is actually a parameter that is for people who have a different virtual host configuration to what we configured inside the tile, but we don't need that right now, so we're actually going to go ahead and click no on that. And the protocol is actually going to be HTTP, and the service instance name is going to be this org that we had made earlier. So we're going to do org. So what it's going to do now is actually it's going to bundle up a proxy, and it's going to send it up to Apigee, which is going to create the proxy in the cloud. And then once that finishes, it's going to bind the application to the service, and all requests coming into sample.apps.pcf.apigeek.net will actually be redirected to the cloud before coming back down to hitting the application. Cool. So now that it's actually bound, we can actually do this with cf routes. We can actually see that the sample app is bound to the service org. Now remember, this is a route service, and that's why we can actually see that the routes are different, or is going to be bound to sample with the service org. So if we actually go into our Apigee console and refresh the proxy page, what we can actually see is that we actually have a new proxy that's got created. So if you go in here, we have the base path is the name of the app that we have, and the target URL is actually the URL of the app that we want to hit. So if we actually go to the trace tab and we start a trace session, and we make that curl request again, and this might take a bit to reflect in Apigee. What we can see is the request actually came in and out of Apigee, and as well as all the different trace information you might want. And it went through, it hit the target URL JS script with a spike arrest, and whatever other policies you might want here, you can do that in the develop tab. So let's say we actually are done with binding our org plan to our application and we don't want to do that anymore. What we actually do is we can actually do a cf apigee unbind org, and the name of the application we want to unbind, so we're going to unbind sample. The domain is actually apps.pcf.apigee.net. The service instance we want to unbind from is org. And now the app is now unbound, and requests will just go straight through and hit our application instead of going out to edge and coming back. So if we do a curl, we get the same response back. It's just that it's not going to Apigee anymore. Let's go over how we would bind an application to the micro gateway plan. So if you remember earlier, we made a service instance of the micro gateway plan that was named micro. And since this plan is just a separate instance inside Cloud Foundry, we can actually use the same application that we use for the org plan. So if you do cf apps, remember we have this sample app. If we curl sample app, all we do is we get back a hello from cf app. And so what we actually want to do is we actually want to push micro gateway as a separate instance inside Cloud Foundry. So what we can do is go over to this micro gateway directory, which is just a clone of the directory on GitHub. We have an application manifest, and we also have a config directory in which I put a YAML file that we need for micro gateway to work. And so what we can actually do is just do a cf push. And what this will do is actually just push Edge Micro Gateway as a separate application within Cloud Foundry. Okay, now we can see that Edge Micro app has been installed, especially to see this by doing cf apps. And we have this Edge Micro app, which is running separately from our sample app. So if we actually go ahead and do a cf apigee bind mg, we're not going to use a bearer token. We're going to use basic auth again. We're actually going to do a proxy bind as well. And we're going to use the test environment with the amer demo 5 org again. And we're going to do sample as the application we want to bind to. Domain is going to be apps.pcf.apigee.net. The route acting as micro gateway, so we need this because we need to tell Cloud Foundry where we want to send requests to. So in this case, it's actually going to be the URL of our app we just pushed as Edge Micro. So target application protocol is just going to be HTTP. Service instance name, remember we called it micro up here. And what's going to do is I was going to bundle up a proxy, send it to Apigee Edge, and that way micro gateway can actually pull down that proxy on a configuration refresh. So what we actually have to do now is we can actually go ahead and restart the Edge Micro app. In order to re-pull down that config, we're going to restart Edge Micro so that it pulls down a fresh configuration detail from Apigee Edge. and that way it has our proxy entry inside Edge Micro. So if we just restart that real quick. Cool. So now if we actually curl sample.apgeeks.net, we get back hello from CF app. Okay, so how do we actually know this is running through Edge Micro? Well, if we do CF logs Edge Micro app, we can see all traffic coming in and out of Edge Micro, of the Edge Micro app. So if we actually go ahead and do this, you can see that we actually got a request that hit the Edge Micro app before hitting our sample app, which returned the hello from CF app. Now let's say we don't want to use this Edge Micro app anymore, and we just want to use our sample app again. Same thing as org, we can just do CF Apigee and bind MG this time. We're going to bind the sample app. Domain is going to be cf or apps.pcf.apigeek.net. Service instance is going to be micro. Cool. Now if we do CF routes, you can see that the sample app is not bound to any service. So if we actually run these logs again inside the Edge Micro app and run a curl, we can see that no requests hit the Edge Micro app, and that means that our application is unbound from it. So let's go over how we would bind a sample application to the co-resident plan. If you recall, we had a service we made called co-resident that reflected the microgateway co-resident plan. Also, if you remember, we created a sample app, which when we curled that, all we got was a hello from CF app. However, since the co-resident plan installs microgateway inside the application container itself, we actually have to make a new application. So if we go inside our directory, we have a application, which is just a Node.js application, along with a couple other different things. We have a plugins directory and a config directory. So if we look inside this config directory, all we have is a YAML file that Edge Micro needs to run. And if we look inside this plugins directory, this will be any plugins, custom plugins that Edge Micro might want to use. So for example, a response override plugin or a bunion logger plugin. If we go inside our manifest, what we have is a name of an application. So in this case, it's going to be sample-co, because we don't want to be the sample app we used earlier. We're going to specify a little bit more memory because we have Edge Micro running inside the application as well as the application. And then number of instances is going to be the same. Host is going to be sample-co. And we have this new health check. And this health check is actually going to check both Edge Micro and the target application itself. So it's going to check the health of both of those applications. And then the path, we're going to push everything inside this directory. And then we don't specify a build pack here because we have the Meta-buildpack, and that doesn't work if you specify a build pack. So we're just going to leave everything to the Meta-buildpack and just let it run on its own. And we also have a couple of environment variables in here. We have Apigee microgateway proxy, which if you change the name of the proxy that gets created when you do a bind, or if you just want to use a specific one, you can specify that name here, and the microgateway will hold down that proxy. If you have any custom plugins, like we mentioned earlier, you can specify that plugins directory in here. And then if your application is worried about having other applications run with extra processes, you can actually specify how many processes you want your Edge Micro to use. In this case, we'll use the default value. And then we also have some mandatory environment variables. We have a config directory you have to point to. So in this case, this points to that config directory up here. And you also have this Apigee microgateway custom JSON policy. So inside here, you have a tag called policies, which is a list of different policies you might want to configure. For example, we have spike arrest, which allows 10 per minute. And then you have a sequence, and this sequence corresponds to the policy order. So in this case, it's going to hit the health check policy before hitting the spike arrest policy. So if we actually go ahead and do a CF Apigee push. It's going to ask us, do you want to use the co-resident plan? We're going to say yeah. It's not going to be a Java application, so we're just going to do sample-co. And what this will do is it will upload all the application information to Cloud Foundry and create that route, but it's not going to actually start the application. So if you do CF apps, we'll see that sample.co is up there, and it has all the memory and disks all set up, but it's not started yet because we want to do the bind before we start it for the co-resident plan to work. So what we can do now is actually do a CF Apigee bind MGC, and we're not going to use the bearer token. Use kwiese@google.com. We're going to do a proxy bind because we both want to make proxy and bind the application. We're going to do test. Rosamare Demo 5 was the organization we're using. We're going to use sample-co. Whatever your micro gateway key, you're going to put that in here. And then your micro gateway secret, put that in here. And then the service instance, remember, was co-resident. Target application port, so this is whatever port your application is going to be running on inside the container. So in our case, it's going to be 8081. The route is going to be sample-co.apps.pcf.apigee. And so this will actually push up a proxy bundle to Edge, which will reflect the base path and everything else we need with this micro gateway instance. So we're actually going to say, before we start it, we're actually going to look at that. So if we actually go over to our proxy console, we can see that we have this Edge micro app that proxy just got created with the sample-co base path, and it points to localhost 8081. So we'd like to start the application now. We're going to say yeah. And this is what actually stage the application. And we can see that the Meta-buildpack took over, and we'll actually find out that we want to push a Node.js application. So it'll invoke that build pack, and then it will go through and set up our Decorator with it as well. So it'll go ahead and install Edge Micro as well as any custom plugins we might want in here before starting the application. Cool. So we can see our app has started, and if we do CF apps, we have this sample.co app. The request is started, and 1 out of 1 instances are running. So if we actually curl this app, we get back is hello from CF app, and if we invoke the spike arrest, we can see that Edge Micro is running. So the spike arrest got engaged, and the request didn't go all the way through. So now we can see that Edge Micro is working inside the application container, which means that the co-resident plan is working, and your app is now secured with Edge Micro.